Book 6, Chapter 9 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 9. At that time, as always happens, the highest society that met at court and at the grand balls was divided into several circles, each with its own particular tone. The largest of these was the French circle of the Napoleonic alliance, the circle of Count Rumyantsev and Caulaincourt. In this group, Helene, as soon as she had settled in Petersburg with her husband, took a very prominent place. She was visited by the members of the French embassy, and by many belonging to that circle, and noted for their intellect and polished manners. Helene had been at Erfurt during the famous meeting of the emperors, and had brought from there these connections with the Napoleonic notabilities. At Erfurt her success had been brilliant. Napoleon himself had noticed her in the theatre, and said of her, "C'est un superbe animal." That's a superb animal. Her success as a beautiful and elegant woman did not surprise Pierre, for she had become even handsomer than before. What did surprise him was that during these last 2 years his wife had succeeded in gaining the reputation d'une femme charmante, aussi spirituelle que belle, of a charming woman as witty as she is lovely. The distinguished Prince de Ligne wrote her 8-page letters. Bilibin saved up his epigrams to produce them in Countess Bezúkhova's presence. To be received in the Countess Bezúkhova's salon was regarded as a diploma of intellect. Young men read books before attending Helene's evenings, to have something to say in her salon, and secretaries of the embassy and even ambassadors confided diplomatic secrets to her, so that in a way Helene was a power. Pierre, who knew she was very stupid, sometimes attended, with a strange feeling of perplexity and fear, her evenings and dinner parties where politics, poetry, and philosophy were discussed. At these parties his feelings were like those of a conjurer who always expects his trick to be found out any moment. But whether because stupidity was just what was needed to run such a salon, or because those who were deceived found pleasure in the deception, at any rate it remained unexposed, and Helene Bezúkhova's reputation as a lovely and clever woman became so firmly established that she could say the emptiest and stupidest things, and everybody would go into raptures over every word of hers, and look for a profound meaning in it of which she herself had no conception. Pierre was just the husband needed for a brilliant society woman. He was that absent-minded crank, a grand seigneur husband who was in no one's way, and far from spoiling the high tone and general impression of the drawing-room, he served, by the contrast he presented to her, as an advantageous background to his elegant and tactful wife. Pierre, during the last 2 years, as a result of his continual absorption in abstract interests and his sincere contempt for all else, had acquired in his wife's circle, which did not interest him, that air of unconcern, indifference, and benevolence toward all, which cannot be acquired artificially, and therefore inspires involuntary respect. He entered his wife's drawing-room as one enters a theatre, was acquainted with everybody, equally pleased to see everyone, and equally indifferent to them all. Sometimes he joined in a conversation which interested him, and regardless of whether any gentlemen of the embassy were present or not, lispingly expressed his views, which were sometimes not at all in accord with the accepted tone of the moment. But the general opinion concerning the queer husband of the most distinguished woman in Petersburg was so well established that no one took his freaks seriously. Among the many young men who frequented her house every day, Boris Drubetskoy, who had already achieved great success in the service, was the most intimate friend of the Bezúkhov household since Helene's return from Erfurt. Helene spoke of him as mon page, and treated him like a child. Her smile for him was the same as for everybody, but sometimes that smile made Pierre uncomfortable. Toward him Boris behaved with a particularly dignified and sad deference. This shade of deference also disturbed Pierre. He had suffered so painfully 3 years before from the mortification to which his wife had subjected him that he now protected himself from the danger of its reputation, first by not being a husband to his wife, and secondly by not allowing himself to suspect. No, now that she has become a bluestocking, she has finally renounced her former infatuations, he told himself. There has never been an instance of a bluestocking being carried away by affairs of the heart. A statement which, though gathered from an unknown source, he believed implicitly. Yet, strange to say, Boris' presence in his wife's drawing-room, and he was almost always there, had a physical effect upon Pierre. It constricted his limbs and destroyed the unconsciousness and freedom of his movements. "What a strange antipathy," thought Pierre. "Yet I used to like him very much." In the eyes of the world, Pierre was a great gentleman, the rather blind and absurd husband of a distinguished wife, a clever crank who did nothing but harm nobody and was a first-rate, good-natured fellow. But a complex and difficult process of internal development was taking place all this time in Pierre's soul, revealing much to him and causing him many spiritual doubts and joys. End of Book 6, Chapter 9. Book 6, Chapter 10 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 10. Pierre went on with his diary, and this is what he wrote in it during that time. 24th November. Got up at 8, read the scriptures, then went to my duties. By Joseph Alexeyevitch's advice, Pierre had entered the service of the state and served on one of the committees. Returned home for dinner and dined alone. The Countess had many visitors I do not like. I ate and drank moderately, and after dinner copied out some passages for the brothers. In the evening I went down to the Countess and told a funny story about B, and only remembered that I ought not to have done so when everybody laughed loudly at it. I am going to bed with a happy and tranquil mind. Great God, help me to walk in thy paths. 1. To conquer anger by calmness and deliberation. 2. To vanquish lust by self-restraint and repulsion. 3. To withdraw from worldliness, but not to avoid A. the service of the state, B. family duties, C. relations with my friends, and the management of my affairs. 27th November. I got up late. On waking, I lay long in bed, yielding to sloth. O God, help and strengthen me that I may walk in thy ways. Read the scriptures, but without proper feeling. Brother Yurusov came and we talked about worldly vanities. He told me of the Emperor's new projects. I began to criticize them, but remembered my rules and my benefactor's words, that a true Freemason should be a zealous worker for the state when his aid is required, and a quiet onlooker when not called on to assist. My tongue is my enemy. Brothers G, V, and O visited me, and we had a preliminary talk about the reception of a new brother. They laid on me the duty of a reader. I feel myself weak and unworthy. Then our talk turned to the interpretation of the 7 pillars and steps of the temple, the 7 sciences, the 7 virtues, the 7 vices, and the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. Brother O was very eloquent. In the evening the admission took place. The new decoration of the premises contributed much to the magnificence of the spectacle. It was Boris Drubetskoy who was admitted. I nominated him and was the reader. A strange feeling agitated me all the time I was alone with him in the dark chamber. I caught myself harboring a feeling of hatred toward him, which I vainly tried to overcome. That is why I should really like to save him from evil and lead him into the path of truth, but evil thoughts of him did not leave me. It seemed to me that his object in entering the Brotherhood was merely to be intimate and in favor with members of our lodge. Apart from the fact that he had asked me several times whether N and S were members of our lodge, a question to which I could not reply, and that, according to my observation, he is incapable of feeling respect for our holy order, and is too preoccupied and satisfied with the outer man to desire spiritual improvement, I had no cause to doubt him. But he seemed to me insincere, and all the time I stood alone with him in the dark temple it seemed to me that he was smiling contemptuously at my words, and I wished really to stab his bare breast with the sword I held to it. I could not be eloquent, nor could I frankly mention my doubts to the brothers and to the Grand Master. Great Architect of Nature, help me to find the true path out of the labyrinth of lies. After this, 3 pages were left blank in the diary, and then the following was written. I have had a long and instructive talk alone with Brother V, who advised me to hold fast by Brother A. Though I am unworthy, much was revealed to me. Adonai is the name of the Creator of the world. Elohim is the name of the ruler of all. The third name is the name unutterable which means the all. Talks with Brother V strengthen, refresh, and support me in the path of virtue. In his presence, doubt has no place. The distinction between the poor teachings of mundane science and our sacred all-embracing teaching is clear to me. Human sciences dissect everything to comprehend it, and kill everything to examine it. In the holy science of our order, all is one, all is known in its entirety and life. The Trinity, the 3 elements of matter, are sulfur, mercury, and salt. Sulfur is of an oily and fiery nature. In combination with salt by its fiery nature, it arouses a desire in the latter by means of which it attracts mercury, seizes it, holds it, and in combination produces other bodies. Mercury is a fluid, volatile, spiritual essence. Christ, the Holy Spirit, Him. 3rd December. Awoke late, read the scriptures, but was apathetic. Afterwards went and paced up and down the large hall. I wished to meditate, but instead my imagination pictured an occurrence of 4 years ago, when Dólokhov, meeting me in Moscow after our duel, said he hoped I was enjoying perfect peace of mind in spite of my wife's absence. At the time I gave no answer. Now I recalled every detail of that meeting, and in my mind gave him the most malevolent and bitter replies. I recollected myself and drove away that thought only when I found myself glowing with anger, but I did not sufficiently repent. Afterwards Boris Drubetskoy came and began relating various adventures. His coming vexed me from the first, and I said something disagreeable to him. He replied. I flared up and said much that was unpleasant and even rude to him. He became silent, and I recollected myself only when it was too late. My God, I cannot get on with him at all. The cause of this is my egotism. I set myself above him, and so become much worse than he, for he is lenient to my rudeness, while I, on the contrary, nourish contempt for him. O God, grant that in his presence I may rather see my own vileness, and behave so that he too may benefit. After dinner I fell asleep, and as I was drowsing off, I clearly heard a voice saying in my left ear, "Thy day." I dreamed that I was walking in the dark, and was suddenly surrounded by dogs, but I went on undismayed. Suddenly a smallish dog seized my left thigh with its teeth and would not let go. I began to throttle it with my hands. Scarcely had I torn it off before another bigger one began biting me. I lifted it up, but the higher I lifted it, the bigger and heavier it grew. And suddenly Brother A came, and taking my arm, led me to a building, to enter which we had to pass along a narrow plank. I stepped on it, but it bent and gave way, and I began to clamber up a fence which I could scarcely reach with my hands. After much effort I dragged myself up, so that my leg hung down on one side and my body on the other. I looked round and saw Brother A standing on the fence and pointing me to a broad avenue and garden, and in the garden was a large and beautiful building. I woke up. O Lord, great architect of nature, help me to tear from myself these dogs, my passions, especially the last, which unites in itself the strength of all the former ones, and aid me to enter that temple of virtue to a vision of which I attained in my dream. 7th December. I dreamed that Joseph Alexeyevitch was sitting in my house, and that I was very glad and wished to entertain him. It seemed as if I chattered incessantly with other people and suddenly remembered that this could not please him, and I wished to come close to him and embrace him. But as soon as I drew near, I saw that his face had changed and grown young, and he was quietly telling me something about the teaching of our order, but so softly that I could not hear it. Then it seemed that we all left the room and something strange happened. We were sitting or lying on the floor. He was telling me something, and I wished to show him my sensibility, and not listening to what he was saying, I began picturing to myself the condition of my inner man and the grace of God sanctifying me. And tears came into my eyes, and I was glad he noticed this. But he looked at me with vexation and jumped up, breaking off his remarks. I felt abashed, and asked whether what he had been saying did not concern me, but he did not reply, gave me a kind look, and then we suddenly found ourselves in my bedroom where there is a double bed. He lay down on the edge of it, and I burned with longing to caress him and lie down too. And he said, "Tell me frankly what is your chief temptation. Do you know it? I think you know it already." Abashed by this question, I replied that sloth was my chief temptation. He shook his head incredulously, and even more abashed, I said that, though I was living with my wife as he advised, I was not living with her as her husband. To this he replied that one should not deprive a wife of one's embraces, and gave me to understand that that was my duty. But I replied that I should be ashamed to do it, and suddenly everything vanished. And I awoke, and found in my mind the text from the Gospel, "The life was the light of men, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." Joseph Alexeyevitch's face had looked young and bright. That day I received a letter from my benefactor in which he wrote about conjugal duties. 9th December. I had a dream from which I awoke with a throbbing heart. I saw that I was in Moscow in my house, in the big sitting-room, and Joseph Alexeyevitch came in from the drawing-room. I seemed to know at once that the process of regeneration had already taken place in him, and I rushed to meet him. I embraced him and kissed his hands, and he said, "Hast thou noticed that my face is different?" I looked at him, still holding him in my arms, and saw that his face was young, but that he had no hair on his head, and his features were quite changed. And I said, "I should have known you had I met you by chance." And I thought to myself, am I telling the truth? And suddenly I saw him lying like a dead body. Then he gradually recovered, and went with me into my study carrying a large book of sheets of drawing paper. I said, "I drew that," and he answered by bowing his head. I opened the book, and on all the pages there were excellent drawings. And in my dream I knew that these drawings represented the love adventures of the soul with its beloved. And on its pages I saw a beautiful representation of a maiden in transparent garments, and with a transparent body, flying up to the clouds. And I seemed to know that this maiden was nothing else than a representation of the Song of Songs. And looking at those drawings, I dreamed I felt that I was doing wrong, but could not tear myself away from them. Lord, help me! My God, if thy forsaking me is thy doing, thy will be done. But if I am myself the cause, teach me what I should do. I shall perish of my debauchery if thou utterly desertest me. End of Book 6, Chapter 10. Book 6, Chapter 11. of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 11. The Rostovs' monetary affairs had not improved during the 2 years they had spent in the country. Though Nicholas Rostov had kept firmly to his resolution and was still serving modestly in an obscure regiment, spending comparatively little, the way of life at Otradno, Metenka's management of affairs in particular, was such that the debts inevitably increased every year. The only resource obviously presenting itself to the old count was to apply for an official post, so he had come to Petersburg to look for one, and also, as he said, to let the lassies enjoy themselves for the last time. Soon after their arrival in Petersburg, Berg proposed to Vera and was accepted. Though in Moscow the Rostovs belonged to the best society without themselves giving it a thought, yet in Petersburg their circle of acquaintances was a mixed and indefinite one. In Petersburg they were provincials, and the very people they had entertained in Moscow without inquiring to what set they belonged, here looked down on them. The Rostovs lived in the same hospitable way in Petersburg as in Moscow, and the most diverse people met at their suppers. Country neighbors from Otradno, impoverished old squires and their daughters, Perenskaya, a maid of honor, Pierre Bezukov, and the son of their district postmaster who had obtained a post in Petersburg. Among the men who very soon became frequent visitors at the Rostovs' house in Petersburg were Boris, Pierre, whom the Count had met in the street and dragged home with him, and Berg, who spent whole days at the Rostovs and paid the eldest daughter, Countess Vera, the attentions a young man pays when he intends to propose. Not in vain had Berg shown everybody his right hand wounded at Austerlitz and held a perfectly unnecessary sword in his left. He narrated that episode so persistently and with so important an air that everyone believed in the merit and usefulness of his deed, and he had obtained 2 decorations for Austerlitz. In the Finnish War he also managed to distinguish himself. He had picked up the scrap of a grenade that had killed an aide-de-camp standing near the commander-in-chief, and had taken it to his commander. Just as he had done after Austerlitz, he related this occurrence at such length and so insistently that everyone again believed it had been necessary to do this, and he received 2 decorations for the Finnish War also. In 1809 he was a captain in the Guards, wore medals, and held some special lucrative posts in Petersburg. Though some skeptics smiled when told of Berg's merits, it could not be denied that he was a painstaking and brave officer, on excellent terms with his superiors, and a moral young man with a brilliant career before him and an assured position in society. 4 years before, meeting a German comrade in the stalls of a Moscow theater, Berg had pointed out Vera Rostova to him and had said in German, "Das soll mein Weib werden," that girl shall be my wife, and from that moment had made up his mind to marry her. Now in Petersburg, having considered the Rostovs' position and his own, he decided that the time had come to propose. Berg's proposal was at first received with a perplexity that was not flattering to him. At first it seemed strange that the son of an obscure Livonian gentleman should propose marriage to a Countess Rostova. But Berg's chief characteristic was such a naive and good-natured egotism that the Rostovs involuntarily came to think it would be a good thing, since he himself was so firmly convinced that it was good, indeed excellent. Moreover, the Rostovs' affairs were seriously embarrassed, as the suitor could not but know. And above all, Vera was 24, had been taken out everywhere, and though she was certainly good-looking and sensible, no one up to now had proposed to her. So they gave their consent. "You see," said Berg to his comrade, whom he called friend only because he knew that everyone has friends, "you see, I have considered it all, and should not marry if I had not thought it all out, or if it were in any way unsuitable. But on the contrary, my papa and mamma are now provided for. I have arranged that rent for them in the Baltic provinces, and I can live in Petersburg on my pay, and with her fortune and my good management we can get along nicely. I am not marrying for money. I consider that dishonorable. But a wife should bring her share, and a husband his. I have my position in the service. She has connections and some means. In our times that is worth something, isn't it? But above all, she is a handsome, estimable girl, and she loves me." Berg blushed and smiled. "And I love her, because her character is sensible and very good. Now, the other sister, though they are the same family, is quite different, an unpleasant character, and has not the same intelligence. She is so, you know, unpleasant. But my fiancé, well, you will be coming," he was going to say, to dine, but changed his mind and said, "to take tea with us." And quickly doubling up his tongue, he blew a small round ring of tobacco smoke, perfectly embodying his dream of happiness. After the first feeling of perplexity aroused in the parents by Berg's proposal, the holiday tone of joyousness usual at such times took possession of the family, but the rejoicing was external and insincere. In the family's feeling toward this wedding a certain awkwardness and constraint was evident, as if they were ashamed of not having loved Vera sufficiently, and of being so ready to get her off their hands. The old Count felt this most. He would probably have been unable to state the cause of his embarrassment, but it resulted from the state of his affairs. He did not know at all how much he had, what his debts amounted to, or what dowry he could give Vera. When his daughters were born, he had assigned to each of them, for her dowry, an estate with 300 serfs. But one of these estates had already been sold, and the other was mortgaged and the interest so much in arrears that it would have to be sold, so that it was impossible to give it to Vera. Nor had he any money. Berg had already been engaged a month, and only a week remained before the wedding, but the Count had not yet decided in his own mind the question of the dowry, nor spoken to his wife about it. At one time the Count thought of giving her the Riazan estate, or of selling a forest. At another time, of borrowing money on a note of hand. A few days before the wedding, Berg entered the Count's study early one morning, and with a pleasant smile respectfully asked his future father-in-law to let him know what Vera's dowry would be. The Count was so disconcerted by this long-foreseen inquiry that without consideration he gave the first reply that came into his head. "I like your being businesslike about it. I like it. You shall be satisfied." And patting Berg on the shoulder, he got up, wishing to end the conversation. But Berg, smiling pleasantly, explained that if he did not know for certain how much Vera would have and did not receive at least part of the dowry in advance, he would have to break matters off. "Because, consider, Count, if I allowed myself to marry now without having definite means to maintain my wife, I should be acting badly." The conversation ended by the Count, who wished to be generous and to avoid further importunity, saying that he would give a note of hand for 80,000 roubles. Berg smiled meekly, kissed the Count on the shoulder, and said that he was very grateful, but that it was impossible for him to arrange his new life without receiving 30,000 in ready money. "Or at least 20,000, Count," he added, "and then a note of hand for only 60,000. "Yes, yes, all right," said the Count hurriedly. "Only, excuse me, my dear fellow, I'll give you 20,000 and a note of hand for 80,000 as well. Yes, yes, kiss me." End of Book 6, Chapter 11.